Today we'll take a look at 3 higher-end indoor dialogue boom microphones. In this episode, we'll be looking at 3 higher-end boom microphones, specifically the Sennheiser MKH 8050, which runs about $1,200 US, the Schoeps CMC 641, which runs $1,620 US, and the Audio Technica AT4053B, which runs about $600 US. First of all, I want to make a clarification about the type of microphone that we're talking about here today. When people hear the term boom microphone, they often think of shotgun microphone. And while a shotgun microphone is a type of boom microphone, there are other types of boom microphones as well. And I typically like to think of microphones overall for film and video in 3 different categories: shotgun microphones, cardioid microphones, which we're going to talk about today, and lavalier microphones. Now, the main difference between shotgun microphones and what I'm going to call cardioids are generally that a shotgun microphone will have an interference tube design, which you can typically see here. It's a relatively long tube with numerous slits along the length of the tube. Generally, shotgun microphones are going to perform better outdoors. They can sometimes run into problems when working indoors. So let's talk about what differentiates a cardioid from a shotgun microphone. There are 2 main advantages that a cardioid has over a shotgun microphone, and perhaps a little bit of a drawback. So it's all a trade-off. Number 1, they don't generally suffer from the warbling sound that you can sometimes get with a shotgun microphone when it's used indoors in a fairly reverberant space when the talent is a little bit off axis from the front of the microphone. That is to say, they're off to the side of the front of the microphone just a little bit. What can happen is you'll get this warbling sort of sound, comb filtering, and it's usually a sound you want to avoid. Number 2, cardioids often sound a little bit more natural when the sound gets off axis from the front of the mic just a little bit. So that can actually be really helpful, again, indoors. If you have a reverberant space where sound is sort of slopping off the walls and back at the microphone, you want that off-axis stuff to sound less colored, and that's what a cardioid is actually pretty good at relative to a shotgun microphone. Now, the trade-off is that cardioids tend not to have as tight a pickup pattern. It's not quite as focused. So you are going to pick up perhaps a little bit more ambiance, but overall it seems like a really good trade-off, and that's why they're typically used by professional mixers when you're recording dialogue indoors. Now, most professional mixers will use super cardioid microphones when they're recording dialogue indoors. Again, that's a little bit of a tighter pickup than a regular cardioid, but it's not so tight as a hypercardioid, and it's a nice trade-off there as well, because as soon as you get to a hypercardioid, the tail on the back, that is the amount of sound it picks up on the back, tends to increase a little bit. So supercardioid is just the most common that professional mixers will use when recording dialogue indoors. Now, of the 3 microphones we're going to look at today, let me describe the one that's different, which is the Sennheiser MKH 8050. It actually uses RF bias technology, so it's a different type of design. The main advantage of RF bias over DC bias is that if you are going to be recording in particularly humid environments, RF bias microphones tend to hold up a little bit better, whereas DC bias microphones can get, if they get enough humidity or actual water that builds up on the capsule, they can actually stop working or start making strange artifacts. So that's where an RF bias microphone can be a bit of an advantage. We're going to go through a series of tests here. I'd encourage you to listen on the best set of headphones or speakers that you have available to you. If you're going to listen on a phone speaker or perhaps earbuds, you may or may not be able to hear a difference here, but maybe you can. We'll see. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Next up, we're going to look at the off-axis rejection of each of the mics and also how much it colors the sound when you get off-axis. So first of all, let's go ahead and run some white noise around each of these microphones just to see what happens. What we did is we brought each of the sound samples into Adobe Audition and measured the frequency response of the microphones when the white noise was in front of the microphone, that is directly on axis, and also what happened to the sound when it was directly off axis, 180 degrees. And you'll see here that each of the mics actually did pretty well. Overall, it appears that the Schoeps did very best and the Sennheiser pretty much right in line with it. You'll note that the Audio Technica did seem to color the sound just a little bit on the frequency response charts. I'm not sure if that really translates to something you can audibly hear, but it was an interesting result. For film and video production, you will often use a boom pole. So having a microphone out on the end of a pole that you're actually handling can transfer some noise from the cable or the pole itself to the microphone. And so those are noises that you want to avoid. You can use a shock mount to eliminate that, and really, when you're handling a boom pole like that, you really need a shock mount. So let's put each of these microphones on a Rycote Shockmount and see how they do. Next up, in terms of self-noise, let's give you a little sample from each of these. And I'm going to normalize these to minus 23 LUFS, so we're starting at the same place, and then we'll give you a few moments of silence. And I'm going to normalize these to minus 23 LUFS, so we're starting at the same place, and then we'll give you a few moments of silence. And I'm going to normalize these to minus 23 LUFS, so we're starting at the same place, and then we'll give you a few moments of silence. You can see here that each of them did pretty nicely. The Audio Technica had some low frequency rumble that it was picking up, and therefore its overall RMS score actually looked like it was a little bit louder. If you put a high pass filter on that, I don't think you're going to notice it, but it did seem to it looked like that capsule was kind of moving around a little bit, or somehow some low frequency was transferring to the capsule. None of them had high pass filters on during the test. In summary, what would I say about these three microphones? Well, I own all three of them. So first of all, there's that. I don't know if that makes me biased or less biased. In any case, I think you can make great recordings with any of the three of these. I think there are some things you do need to kind of watch for with the Audio Technica a little bit more. On the Audio Technica, it did seem to pick up some very low frequency sound, which actually wasn't sound so much. It seemed like it was just the capsule somehow vibrating at very low frequencies. So you will probably need to use a high pass filter. I think they're each going to sound different on different voices. And that really is kind of a theme that I want to convey, is that there's no such thing as the perfect microphone. I would say, though, that the Sennheiser and the Schoeps, to me, seem like really good all-around microphones. They seem to work on most people's voices and to sound really good on most people's voices. The Audio Technica as well. I have found that that one gets a little bit brittle when you're working with people with a lot of sibilance, like my own voice. So that's just something to keep in mind. But, you know, if you're on a tighter budget, it really is a fantastic mic as well. So overall, there is a look at three different higher-end boom microphones that you might use for indoor dialogue. Hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. And if you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that. And if you'd like to be notified when the new episode comes out, go ahead and click on the bell icon. We'll talk to you again soon.